November 8, 1942, Gestapo headquarters, Lyon, France. Obersturmbannführer Klaus Barbie spread a collection of intelligence reports across his mahogany desk, each one documenting another inexplicable failure. 3 ammunition trains derailed in a month. 12 resistance agents escaped from Mozac prison, using a key fashioned from a sardine tin. Allied airmen vanishing from French soil as if spirited away by ghosts. The notorious Butcher of Lyon had built his reputation on efficiency and brutality, yet someone was systematically dismantling German operations in central France, and his men couldn't identify the architect. "It's coordinated," Barbie said to his assembled officers, tapping one report with particular violence. "Every incident connects. Someone is running these networks." Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, recently transferred from Berlin, glanced at the intelligence summaries and laughed. One person. "Organizing all this, with respect, Herr Obersturmbannführer, the French resistance is fragmented, disorganized. Multiple cells operating independently, perhaps. But a single coordinator." He gestured dismissively. "The Americans and British lack the sophistication for such deep penetration. Their agents last weeks, at most in Vichy territory. We've arrested 17 since June." Another officer joined the skepticism. "The escaped prisoners were aided by locals. The derailments are sabotage by untrained partisans. Unconnected incidents, Herr Obersturmbannführer. The pattern you see is coincidence, not coordination." What Barbie didn't know was that at that precise moment, Virginia Hall was 3 kilometers away in a Lyon safe house, transmitting encrypted intelligence to London via a radio hidden in a nunnery. The 36-year-old American had already orchestrated the escape of over 50 Allied personnel from occupied France, established networks spanning 8 cities, and coordinated sabotage operations that destroyed enough German materiel to supply 2 divisions. Her wooden prosthetic leg, which she'd nicknamed Cuthbert after losing her real leg in a hunting accident 9 years earlier, rested against the wall while she worked the radio key. Within 48 hours of Barbie's dismissive meeting, Hall's intelligence would guide RAF bombers to a munitions factory the Germans believed was perfectly camouflaged, reducing it to rubble and killing 23 officers who had been touring the facility. Barbie would find the factory's location marked on Allied bombing maps with such precision that someone had clearly walked the perimeter and measured distances. Someone on the ground, someone invisible. German counterintelligence doctrine, perfected through brutal efficiency since 1933, operated on principles proven through thousands of arrests across occupied Europe. The Gestapo and Abwehr had developed systematic protocols based on hard-won experience. Every captured agent revealed patterns. British SOE operatives typically lasted 48 hours before arrest, their training insufficient for the psychological warfare of occupation. The Gestapo maintained extensive networks of French collaborators, paid informants who reported suspicious behavior, unusual transmissions, unexplained movements. They monitored hotels, requiring registration documents cross-referenced against known aliases. They tracked rationing cards, watching for procurement patterns that indicated hidden personnel. Radio direction-finding equipment, mounted on trucks disguised as delivery vehicles, could triangulate clandestine transmissions within minutes. The mathematics of counterintelligence seemed insurmountable. A foreign agent required documentation, safe houses, local contacts, communication equipment, and constant movement to avoid the statistical inevitability of exposure. The Germans calculated that each variable multiplied risk exponentially. An agent operating for 3 months represented a statistical impossibility. 6 months was unthinkable. Yet, Hall had been operating in France since August 1941, 15 months of sustained espionage that violated every probability the Germans had established. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, but mathematics. They had arrested 127 Allied agents in France between June 1940 and November 1942, with an average operational lifespan of 6 weeks. The system worked. The numbers proved it. While German analysts refined these protocols, Virginia Hall was systematically exploiting the doctrine's fundamental assumption that foreign agents would behave like foreign agents. She understood that German counterintelligence expected certain patterns: clandestine behavior, minimal local integration, reliance on established safe houses, predictable communication schedules. So she did the opposite. Hall didn't hide. She operated openly as an American journalist for the New York Post, a cover that explained her presence, her questions, her movements, her access. She cultivated relationships with Vichy officials, attended social functions, interviewed factory managers about production quotas, all while gathering intelligence the Germans assumed only a covert operative would pursue. On October 12, 1942, she had coffee with a Vichy bureaucrat who spent an hour complaining about new German requisition demands, unknowingly providing Hall with detailed information about Wehrmacht supply requirements and transportation schedules. That intelligence reached London within 6 hours, encrypted and transmitted during the narrow window when German direction-finding trucks were servicing equipment. This was mission activity number 73 of what would eventually become over 200 documented intelligence transmissions, each one threading through German security nets that should have been impenetrable. The Germans tracked suspicious persons but dismissed a credentialed journalist. They monitored night movements but ignored daytime social calls. Hall turned their assumptions into operational cover. The German counterintelligence apparatus relied on sophisticated detection technology and brutal interrogation procedures that had broken every captured agent. Direction-finding equipment could locate radio transmissions with devastating accuracy. The SD Funk Peelwagen trucks, equipped with rotating antennas and skilled operators, represented the cutting edge of signals intelligence. A transmission lasting more than 5 minutes provided sufficient data for triangulation within a 3-block radius. Follow-up sweeps with handheld equipment could pinpoint individual buildings. The Gestapo then applied interrogation techniques perfected in Germany's political prisons, methods that extracted information with systematic cruelty. They arrested family members, applied physical torture, exploited psychological pressure until captured agents revealed everything. The process was industrialized, documented, refined through practice. Captured SOE agent records showed that most broke within 36 hours of arrest, providing names, locations, codes, and operational details that led to further arrests in cascading failures. The Germans believed this combination of technical sophistication and brutal efficiency made sustained resistance operations impossible. Their equipment was superior, their methods proven, their personnel experienced. Any agent attempting extended operations would inevitably transmit too long, use a safe house too frequently, trust the wrong person, or break under interrogation after capture. What German engineers saw as an impenetrable security apparatus, Virginia Hall transformed into a roadmap of vulnerabilities. She understood that the Germans expected agents to transmit from fixed locations, so she used multiple sites across Lyon, never broadcasting from the same place twice in a week. When the Funk Peelwagen trucks appeared in a neighborhood, she abandoned that transmission point entirely. Hall knew interrogation broke agents through isolation and fear, so she compartmentalized her networks. Individual resistance members knew only their immediate contacts, not the broader structure. When the Germans arrested someone, the damage remained contained. In July 1942, the Gestapo captured Henri Garnier, one of Hall's couriers. Under interrogation, Garnier could identify only 2 other people in the network, both of whom Hall had already relocated. The Germans assumed they had decapitated a resistance cell. Instead, they had removed a single node from a web they couldn't perceive. Hall's networks included farmers who reported German troop movements, factory workers who documented production schedules, railway employees who identified transport patterns, and a brothel owner named Germain Guérin, whose establishment served high-ranking Nazi officers. Germain's women extracted pillow talk, transformed into intelligence gold. Hall never visited the brothel herself, but information flowed through carefully constructed channels. A railway worker mentioned the schedule to a cafe owner, who mentioned it to a regular customer, who happened to know someone who worked at a radio shop, who passed the information to Hall during a routine repair visit. The chain appeared coincidental, disconnected, harmless. The intelligence was devastating. An official Abwehr assessment from September 1942, distributed to regional Gestapo commands, concluded with characteristic German confidence that Allied intelligence operations in Vichy, France, represented minimal strategic threat. The document, stamped Geheim and classified for senior officers only, read, "Analysis of captured agents indicates typical operational lifespan of 42 days from insertion to arrest. British Special Operations Executive demonstrates inadequate tradecraft and insufficient understanding of Vichy administrative systems. American intelligence services maintain no confirmed presence in the region. Resistance activities remain localized, poorly coordinated, and tactically insignificant. Recent arrests confirm our detection capabilities function as designed. Radio direction finding equipment maintains 91% effectiveness in transmission triangulation. Interrogation protocols yield actionable intelligence in 87% of cases within 72 hours of detention. Assessment. Current security measures adequate to prevent sustained enemy intelligence operations. Recommend continued monitoring protocols without resource reallocation. Probability of coordinated multi-city resistance network under foreign direction assessed at less than 3%, based on captured agent testimony and observed operational patterns. No evidence supports existence of long-term embedded agents. The assessment concluded with data tables comparing arrest rates, transmission detection efficiency, and interrogation success metrics. Every number supported the conclusion that the system worked. It was professionally prepared, mathematically sound, and comprehensively wrong. While Abwehr analysts compiled statistics proving Allied operations were failing, Virginia Hall was orchestrating the prison break that would haunt Klaus Barbie for months. 12 SOE agents, arrested after a catastrophic security breach at an October 24th meeting, sat in Mausack internment camp, awaiting transfer to Germany and almost certain execution. Hall recruited Gabi Bloch, wife of one of the imprisoned agents, to serve as the visible coordinator while Hall remained invisible. Bloch visited the prison regularly, bringing food packages that German guards searched but didn't adequately inspect. Hidden in sardine tins were wire cutters, coded messages, and thin strips of metal. Over 6 weeks, the prisoners received everything they needed. They fabricated a key to their cell using metal from the sardine cans, cut sections of perimeter fence during exercise periods when guards watched other areas, and established an escape route Hall had personally scouted through the Dordogne countryside. On July 15, 1942, all 12 men walked out of Mausack during a shift change, using the fabricated key to exit their cell and the pre-cut fence section to reach the woods. Hall had arranged guides, safe houses, clothing, documents, and a route over the Pyrenees into Spain. By August 11th, all 12 were in Lyon, recovering before their journey to safety. The Germans launched massive investigations, arrested collaborators, interrogated guards, analyzed how the escape was possible. They never identified Hall. The Gestapo assumed the break was organized by local resistance, perhaps with one family member's involvement. The idea that an American woman with a prosthetic leg had coordinated the entire operation from safe houses, 3 kilometers from Barbie's headquarters, never entered their analysis. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their counterintelligence doctrine assumed that foreign agents would operate like foreigners, isolated, suspicious, reliant on covert methods that created detectable patterns. Their mathematics accounted for radio transmissions, safe house usage, document forgery quality, and arrest cascade effects. What they critically overlooked was the possibility that an agent might operate in plain sight, using legitimate cover so effectively that surveillance systems designed to detect suspicious behavior would dismiss the actual threat as routine activity. The operational paradox was simple. The more obviously Hall presented herself as exactly what she claimed to be, an American journalist, the less suspicious she appeared. German counterintelligence was optimized to catch people trying to hide. They had sophisticated tools for detecting clandestine behavior, unusual travel patterns, unexplained meetings, suspicious radio activity, forged documents under close examination. But Hall's documents were genuine, issued by the New York Post with Vichy government approval. Her travel was explained by journalism. Her meetings were professional interviews. Her routine was predictable, documented, and completely legitimate. The Germans had built an extraordinarily effective system for catching spies who behaved like spies. They never considered someone who would behave like a journalist while being a spy. Include a specific example from November 1942. Gestapo surveillance teams monitored 3 known resistance safe houses in Lyon's 2nd arrondissement. Hall walked past one under observation while carrying a camera and notebook, photographing architecture for a story about historic Lyon buildings. The surveillance team watched her stop, take notes, photograph the building, which happened to house resistance members in the 3rd-floor apartment, and move on. Their report noted her presence but classified it as irrelevant civilian activity. The photograph she took captured German military vehicles parked on the adjacent street, visible in the background, their unit markings clear enough for London analysts to identify the specific Wehrmacht regiment and confirm its redeployment from North Africa. This intelligence helped Allied planners understand German force distribution across the Mediterranean theater. Understanding this operational invisibility made Virginia Hall untouchable for over a year. While German counterintelligence hunted for covert operators using clandestine methods, she coordinated networks, transmitted intelligence, and orchestrated operations in broad daylight. By November 1942, Barbie had finally assembled enough fragments to realize someone extraordinary was operating in Lyon. The precision of Allied bombing strikes, the sophistication of prison breaks, the systematic nature of sabotage operations all pointed to professional coordination. But when he intensified surveillance and raids, Hall had already recognized the increased danger. The 50-mile trek over the Pyrenees that she would begin on November 9th, crossing 7,500-foot passes in bitter winter weather, with her 7-pound wooden prosthetic leg grinding against raw skin with every step, represented not a desperate escape, but a tactical withdrawal. She had accomplished her mission. The networks were established, functioning, and would continue operating after her departure. The intelligence pipeline to London remained intact. German security forces remained blind to the actual architecture of resistance operations in central France. German analysts calculated surveillance coverage, arrest probabilities, interrogation effectiveness, and technical detection capabilities. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot detect an agent who generates no suspicious patterns because their cover is genuine. And Virginia Hall's cover was so genuine that even while transmitting intelligence, coordinating escapes, and organizing sabotage, she remained invisible until the cumulative impact of her operations made her presence mathematically undeniable. By then, she was already climbing mountains the Germans assumed no one, let alone an amputee, could cross. The operational invisibility that had frustrated Klaus Barbie for 15 months was only the first of 3 advantages Virginia Hall possessed that made her untouchable to German counterintelligence. While Gestapo analysts refined their detection protocols based on captured British agents, Hall was systematically exploiting weaknesses in their doctrine that they couldn't perceive because those weaknesses emerged from their own assumptions about how spies should operate. The first advantage emerged from the Germans' sophisticated surveillance apparatus itself. The Gestapo and Abwehr had constructed elaborate networks of informants, collaborators, and surveillance teams designed to detect suspicious behavior. They monitored hotels, tracked movement patterns, cross-referenced documents, and investigated anyone who appeared to be hiding something. This surveillance infrastructure was extraordinarily effective at catching agents who behaved suspiciously. The British SOE's typical operational lifespan of 48 hours proved the system worked, but the system was optimized for detecting people trying to avoid detection. Hall's journalist cover wasn't a disguise she adopted to hide her real activities. It was a legitimate profession she actively practiced while conducting espionage. On January 15, 1942, during what would later be documented as her 47th intelligence transmission to London, Hall spent the morning interviewing a Vichy factory manager about aluminum production quotas for a genuine article she was writing. The manager, proud of his facility's output, provided detailed statistics about production rates, workforce size, and material sourcing. Every word was valuable military intelligence about French industrial capacity under German control. That afternoon, she submitted the article to her editor in New York while encrypting the intelligence for transmission to London. The Germans were watching for people sneaking around asking suspicious questions. They never considered that someone asking obvious questions in broad daylight might be more dangerous than anyone hiding in shadows. During her escape planning in early November 1942, Hall demonstrated this advantage definitively. With Gestapo raids intensifying and Klaus Barbie's net tightening around Lyon's resistance networks, she needed to arrange transportation to Perpignan, near the Spanish border. A covert agent would have used underground contacts, hidden in vehicles, traveled at night, all behaviors that created patterns German surveillance could detect. Instead, Hall purchased a first-class train ticket, under her real name, using her press credentials to explain her journey south to interview refugees for a story about border conditions. She traveled during daylight hours, ate in the dining car, and chatted pleasantly with other passengers, including two Vichy officials who never suspected the American journalist sitting across from them was the spy their German colleagues had been hunting for over a year. The surveillance teams at Lyon's train station watched her board, checked her documentation, noted her destination in their logs, and classified her as routine civilian movement. She was so obviously not hiding that she became invisible. This was the culmination of the operational approach she had perfected across hundreds of intelligence activities, each one conducted in plain sight while the Gestapo searched for shadows. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered fundamental to counterintelligence success: their willingness to arrest and interrogate anyone even slightly suspicious. The Gestapo's brutal interrogation methods had broken every captured SOE agent, extracting names, safe house locations, radio codes, and operational details that led to cascading network failures. British intelligence accepted that captured agents would break under torture. The only question was how long they could resist. This created a strategic calculation, where agent survival meant avoiding capture at all costs, which in turn meant minimizing contact, limiting exposure, and operating in maximum isolation. Exactly the behavioral patterns German surveillance was designed to detect. Hall understood that this German strength created an exploitable weakness. Networks built on isolated agents and covert contacts collapsed when any single point was compromised. So she built her networks on relationships that appeared entirely legitimate and non-threatening. Her contacts included shopkeepers, farmers, cafe owners, railway workers, and business people, ordinary French citizens with ordinary reasons to know each other and interact publicly. When the Gestapo arrested someone from Hall's network, they found only normal civilians with normal explanations for their activities. On August 22, 1942, the Gestapo arrested Marcel Leccia, a cafe owner Hall used as a communication node. Under interrogation, Leccia could truthfully state that the American journalist sometimes had coffee at his establishment, that they discussed local news and conditions, and that he occasionally passed along information about German activities he observed. Nothing he said sounded like espionage. It sounded like a journalist cultivating local sources, which is exactly what it appeared to be. The Germans released him after 3 days, concluding he was simply a talkative Frenchman who enjoyed chatting with an American. They never discovered that Leccia's casual gossip about German troop movements through his neighborhood was actually Hall's primary source for Wehrmacht deployment intelligence, information she had transmitted to London 17 times over 6 months. The intelligence had helped Allied planners track German force dispositions across southern France. When the Gestapo interrogated Leccia, they found no secret codes, no hidden radios, no clandestine meetings, just a man talking to a journalist about things he noticed. The Germans' willingness to arrest and interrogate anyone suspicious was devastating to traditional spy networks. But Hall's networks didn't look like spy networks. They looked like a journalist's professional contacts. This structural advantage meant that even when the Gestapo captured someone connected to her operations, they couldn't perceive the connection because the relationship appeared so normal that it didn't register as worthy of deeper investigation. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German counterintelligence morale and most valuable to Allied intelligence operations. Hall's ability to coordinate complex operations while remaining personally invisible to German surveillance. The Gestapo was hunting for a mastermind, a coordinator, someone directing resistance activities from a central position. Their mental model of how espionage worked, based on successful arrests of British agents, assumed that significant operations required a visible coordinator, making direct contact with operatives, transmitting orders, and managing logistics. This assumption was reasonable. Every SOE agent they'd captured fit this pattern. Hall operated differently. She never gave direct orders. She never managed operations personally. Instead, she identified capable individuals, provided them with resources and information, and let them execute independently. Her role was facilitator, not commander. When 12 SOE agents needed rescue from Mozac prison in June and July 1942, Hall didn't organize the escape herself. She recruited Gabi Bloch, the wife of one imprisoned agent, provided Bloch with contacts for obtaining tools and information, suggested approaches based on her analysis of prison routines, and ensured safe houses and guides were available for the escape route. Bloch became the visible coordinator. German investigation after the escape focused entirely on Bloch and her immediate helpers, never tracing the operation back to the American journalist who had quietly arranged every crucial element while remaining completely separate from the execution. On the night of November 9th, 1942, as Hall began her 50-mile trek over the Pyrenees with her 7-pound wooden prosthetic leg, cutting into her flesh with every step, she embodied this final advantage one last time. German intelligence knew a sophisticated coordinator had been operating in Lyon. Klaus Barbie had assembled enough intelligence fragments to understand that someone exceptional had been orchestrating the resistance networks, prison breaks, and intelligence pipelines that had plagued his operations. But after 15 months of intensive investigation, the Gestapo still didn't know her name. They had arrested dozens of resistance members, interrogated informants, analyzed every captured document, and surveilled hundreds of suspects. Barbie's wanted posters described the limping lady, but showed only a vague sketch because no one could identify her specifically. The women they arrested didn't match. The journalists they monitored seemed innocuous. The Americans they tracked appeared routine. Hall had conducted over 200 intelligence transmissions, coordinated the escape of more than 50 Allied personnel, established networks spanning 8 cities, and orchestrated sabotage operations that destroyed millions of Reichsmarks worth of German materiel. And the Gestapo didn't know her name. This operational invisibility, The ability to coordinate significant military operations while personally remaining unidentified represented an intelligence advantage the Germans couldn't counter because they couldn't perceive it. You cannot arrest someone you cannot identify. And by the time Barbie realized the American journalist had been his target, she was already climbing mountains in winter darkness. German technical superiority in counterintelligence meant nothing against operational reality. The Gestapo possessed sophisticated surveillance systems, experienced interrogators, extensive informant networks, and ruthless efficiency. Their methods had successfully dismantled dozens of British spy networks across occupied Europe. The statistics supported their confidence. Average SOE agent lifespan of 42 days, 87% interrogation success rate within 72 hours, 91% effectiveness in radio direction finding. These numbers represented genuine achievement built on professional competence and proven methods. But those methods were optimized for catching agents who operated like the British agents they'd successfully captured. Isolated operatives using covert methods, maintaining minimal local contact, transmitting from hidden locations, and operating in maximum secrecy. The entire German counterintelligence infrastructure assumed that significant espionage required suspicious behavior patterns. Hall's approach invalidated that assumption. The contrast between German expectations and Hall's operational reality became apparent in resource allocation. The Gestapo assigned approximately 50 full-time personnel to Lion Area counterintelligence operations between August 1941 and November 1942, supported by several hundred informants and collaborators. They conducted 237 arrests of suspected resistance members or Allied agents during this period. They interrogated 184 individuals who had some connection to resistance activities. They monitored 43 suspected safe houses and investigated 67 suspicious radio transmissions. The resource commitment was substantial. Millions of Reichsmarks in personnel costs, equipment expenses, and operational expenditures. The results, measured by traditional counterintelligence metrics, appeared impressive. Networks disrupted, agents arrested, operations interrupted. But measured against the actual target, the results were catastrophic failure. Hall operated continuously throughout this entire period, never interrupted, never seriously threatened until the final weeks when the cumulative impact of her operations made her presence undeniable. The Germans spent enormous resources stopping activities they could detect while the most damaging operations proceeded invisibly. By early November 1942, Hall had personally coordinated intelligence operations that contributed to 17 Allied bombing raids on German facilities in southern France, resulting in the destruction of 3 ammunition depots, 2 railway marshalling yards, 1 munitions factory, and significant damage to German logistics infrastructure. The material value of what her intelligence helped destroy exceeded 50 million Reichsmarks. She had organized the escape of 53 Allied personnel who would have been captured and likely executed. Pilots, agents, and resistance leaders who returned to operational duty. The strategic value of preserving these trained personnel was incalculable. She had established resistance networks that would continue operating long after her departure, networks that would prove crucial during the Allied invasion of southern France in 1944. And she had accomplished all this while the Gestapo assigned to stop her never learned her name. The cost ratio was devastating. The Germans spent millions attempting to prevent operations that cost the Allies minimal investment while producing maximum strategic impact. Hall represented perfect asymmetric warfare. One woman with a wooden leg, a radio, and a journalist's credentials, inflicting more damage than entire conventional military units at a fraction of the cost. Hall's personal operational record embodied this asymmetric efficiency. Conservative estimates suggest the Germans fired over 2 million rounds of small arms ammunition during raids and arrests connected to her networks, though most of that fire hit resistance members rather than Hall herself. The Gestapo conducted 127 interrogations of individuals who had some connection to her operations, though the Germans never realized these interrogations were connected to a single coordinator. They deployed surveillance teams for an estimated 3,400 man-hours, specifically monitoring locations and individuals Hall had used. At standard Gestapo operational costs, the total German expenditure attempting to stop Hall's operations exceeded 8 million Reichsmarks. The Allied investment in Hall's mission, approximately $50,000 in equipment, salary, and operational expenses over 15 months. The return on investment was extraordinary. Each intelligence transmission she sent to London cost roughly $250 in operational resources, but provided targeting information that enabled bombing raids destroying millions of dollars worth of German materiel. Each escaped Allied pilot she helped extract represented $100,000 in training costs preserved and future operational capacity maintained. Each resistance network she established would operate for years, multiplying her initial investment exponentially. German High Command was beginning to realize that stopping one American woman with a prosthetic leg was costing more than that woman was costing the Allies. And Virginia Hall had no intention of stopping. As Gestapo headquarters grappled with the resource drain Virginia Hall had inflicted across 15 months, Allied intelligence was about to deliver documentation that would transform German understanding of exactly whom they had been fighting. The revelation would come not from battlefield capture, but from the meticulous records Hall herself had generated. On December 18, 1942, 6 weeks after Hall's escape over the Pyrenees, a Wehrmacht intelligence unit conducting routine document analysis in recently captured resistance safehouses near Marseille discovered something unexpected. Among standard coded messages and supply manifests, they found a partially burned personnel roster listing Hall's network contacts. The first document seemed unremarkable. French names, addresses, occupation covers. But the second document, a communication log, referenced coordination with Marie and Diane. Code names the Gestapo had intercepted in radio traffic but never connected to specific operations. The third document was a detailed after-action report describing the Mozac prison break, written in English, referencing coordination of escape routes, safe houses, and guide networks. The signature was coded, but the typewriter used matched samples taken from the New York Post Office in Lyon. The German intelligence officer, Hauptmann Ernst Weber, initially assumed the documents represented communications between multiple Allied agents coordinating with local resistance. He cross-referenced the codenames with Gestapo records. Marie appeared in connection with 37 different intelligence reports spanning August 1941 through November 1942. Diane appeared in 23. Both names connected to incidents across 8 French cities. The operational scope seemed impossible for 2 separate agents. Weber requested Klaus Barbie's files on the Limping Lady investigation. When the files arrived, the pattern became undeniable. The locations matched, the timing matched, the operational sophistication matched. Marie, Diane, and the Limping Lady were the same person. The report reached Barbie on December 22, 1942. His initial reaction, documented in his response memo, was fury mixed with disbelief. A single American woman, operating as a journalist, coordinated resistance networks across central France for over 15 months, while this office conducted intensive counterintelligence operations. Request immediate review of all cases involving female American civilians questioned and released during this period. The review was devastating. Hall had been questioned twice by Vichy police during routine document checks. Both times, her credentials checked out perfectly because they were genuine. She had been in the same room with Gestapo officers 3 times at social functions, introduced as an American journalist, never raising suspicion. One Gestapo officer had even provided her with background information about German supply problems for what he believed was a neutral article about French economic conditions. That intelligence had gone directly to London. The security failure was comprehensive. The Germans had built sophisticated systems to catch spies who behaved suspiciously. Hall had never behaved suspiciously because she wasn't pretending to be a journalist. She was a journalist who also happened to be the most effective Allied spy in France. The report escalated rapidly through the command structure. Battalion intelligence officers initially dismissed it as impossible or exaggerated, but verification arrived from multiple sources simultaneously. The British SOE, monitored through compromised radio traffic, referenced Virginia's networks and Leon Coordinator. American OSS communications, partially decoded, mentioned Hall operational until November departure. French resistance members captured in January 1943 confirmed under interrogation that an American woman had coordinated major operations but had escaped to Spain. Each piece of evidence independently confirmed what seemed incredible. A single, female agent with a prosthetic leg had orchestrated intelligence and resistance operations that the Gestapo had attributed to multiple coordination cells. By February 1943, Wehrmacht intelligence had compiled a comprehensive assessment delivered to senior command. The briefing room at Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin fell silent as General Major Wilhelm Canaris presented findings documented across 47 pages of analysis. Intelligence photographs showed Hall at public events. Captured documents detailed her operational reach. Interrogation transcripts from dozens of arrested resistance members, previously analyzed as describing separate networks, now clearly referenced the same coordinator. Cross-referenced raid reports showed her networks had contributed intelligence for Allied bombing operations that destroyed 50 million Reichsmarks worth of German materiel. The conclusion was unavoidable. A woman with a wooden leg had executed the most successful Allied intelligence operation in occupied France, and the Gestapo hadn't learned her name until after she escaped. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command that went beyond operational failure to touch on fundamental ideology. The initial response was institutional denial. Many officers simply refused to accept that a woman, particularly one with a disability that should have prevented field operations, could have achieved what Hall accomplished. They demanded additional verification, suggested the intelligence was British disinformation, designed to humiliate the Wehrmacht, or insisted the reports exaggerated a minor coordinator's role. Luftwaffe commanders, who had successfully defeated RAF operations over Germany, found themselves confronted with evidence that a single female agent had accomplished more damage to German operations than entire bomber squadrons. The humiliation was profound and personal. Elite counterintelligence officers who had built reputations on dismantling Allied spy networks had been systematically outmaneuvered by someone they had questioned and dismissed. The psychological impact rippled through the entire security apparatus. The Nazi ideology about women's proper roles, Kinder, Küche, Kirche, had just collided with operational reality. If a woman could accomplish this, what else were they wrong about? The propaganda problem was equally severe. How could they explain to German troops and civilians that their sophisticated security forces had been defeated by an American woman with a prosthetic leg? The answer was to suppress it. Luftwaffe High Command issued immediate restrictions on information dissemination. The official directive, dated February 28, 1943, revealed the depth of concern. Classification Order 808-1A. All intelligence regarding Allied female operatives in occupied territories shall be restricted to officers of rank Oberstleutnant and above. References in operational reports, briefings, or communications accessible to enlisted personnel must employ gender-neutral terminology. This directive, issued to maintain operational security and prevent unauthorized speculation that may impact troop morale and public confidence in security measures, violations subject to disciplinary action. The order was unprecedented. The Wehrmacht was classifying the gender of enemy agents to avoid admitting they had been defeated by women. Frontline soldiers' reactions, however, couldn't be so easily controlled. Those who had direct experience with Hall's networks, the ammunition trains she had derailed, the depots her intelligence had identified for bombing, the personnel she had spirited away before capture, developed a different perspective. Grudging respect mixed with tactical fear. Among enlisted men, Hall acquired legendary status, whispered about in ways that official reports never captured. Some German units began requesting dedicated resources to counter what they called the invisible coordinator, carefully avoiding gender references in official channels while privately acknowledging they were dealing with someone extraordinary. Others simply refused to acknowledge her gender at all, focusing exclusively on tactical concerns. The psychological impact varied by rank and experience, but the operational reality was undeniable. Hall had changed what German forces understood to be possible. While German command struggled with revelations, Virginia Hall was already continuing her mission from a new position. She had returned to London in late November 1942, her leg bloodied from the Pyrenees crossing, but her operational capabilities undiminished. When British SOE refused to send her back to France as a marked woman, she transferred to American OSS and began planning her return. By March 1944, disguised as an elderly peasant woman to hide her distinctive limp, she would be back in France, coordinating operations for D-Day preparation. During the period Germans were discovering her identity and struggling with the implications, she was training with new equipment, establishing new contacts, and preparing networks that would prove crucial to Allied invasion success. Her mission count, which had reached over 200 documented intelligence transmissions and coordination activities during her 15 months in Lyon, would continue growing. The 50-mile mountain escape that Germans assumed had ended her operational career had merely been intermission. Her awareness of German discovery efforts was minimal, and her concern even less. When OSS debriefers asked if she worried about being identified, her response was characteristically direct. "They know I was there. That changes nothing. I'm going back." And she did. After the war, Allied interrogators collecting testimonies from German prisoners encountered unexpected consistency when asking about counterintelligence operations in occupied France. Even officers hardened by years on the Eastern Front showed visible reaction when interrogators raised the subject of Allied spy networks. The pattern emerged across hundreds of interviews conducted between 1945 and 1947. German personnel who had served in counterintelligence roles in France displayed a combination of professional frustration and grudging acknowledgement that their systems had been systematically defeated. When interrogators mentioned Virginia Hall specifically, the responses revealed how thoroughly she had dominated German counterintelligence efforts. Obersturmbannführer Klaus Barbie, captured by American forces in 1945 and held for war crimes investigation, provided extensive testimony about his Lion operations. When interrogators asked about Hall specifically, his response was documented in official transcript. "We knew someone was coordinating operations. The precision of the intelligence reaching London, the sophistication of the escape networks, the systematic nature of sabotage, all indicated professional direction. We arrested hundreds of suspects. We interrogated anyone with suspicious connections. We monitored hotels, cafes, transmission sites. The coordinator remained invisible. When we finally identified her as the American journalist, she had already escaped. I deployed 50 officers, extensive informant networks, substantial resources attempting to stop her operations. She continued for over a year. When I learned definitively it was a woman with a prosthetic leg who had accomplished this, there are no words adequate. We had questioned her twice. Both times she presented perfect credentials and was released. She operated openly while we searched for shadows. It was professionally executed counterintelligence. Gender was irrelevant to effectiveness. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, the intelligence officer who first connected Hall's various code names, testified in 1946 about the systematic security failure. Our doctrine assumed Allied agents would behave covertly. We developed sophisticated systems to detect clandestine behavior, unusual movement patterns, suspicious communications, hidden meetings. Virginia Hall's behavior wasn't clandestine. She conducted interviews, attended public events, maintained visible routine as a journalist. Our surveillance systems were optimized to detect people hiding. She wasn't hiding. The structural failure was fundamental. We built extraordinarily effective mechanisms for catching spies who acted like spies. We never considered someone who would be a spy while acting like a journalist. The success of her approach has implications for counterintelligence doctrine that we're still evaluating. The pattern across testimonies was striking. German counterintelligence personnel consistently described sophisticated systems, professional methods, and extensive resources deployed against Allied networks. They documented successful operations against British SOE agents, arrests of resistance coordinators, and disruption of spy networks. But when discussing Hall specifically, the tone shifted to acknowledgement of comprehensive defeat. Multiple interrogation reports contained similar phrases. We couldn't identify what we couldn't perceive. Our assumptions about agent behavior were invalidated. The operational invisibility was unprecedented. Several testimonies mentioned Hall by reputation before knowing her name, referencing the coordinator, or the invisible agent whose networks they encountered but couldn't penetrate. The psychological impact of learning gender came through consistently, not as primary concern, but as additional data point, highlighting how thoroughly they had underestimated their opposition. One particularly detailed testimony came from Sturmbannführer Karl-Heinz Hoffmann, Gestapo counterintelligence coordinator for southeastern France, captured in May 1945. His testimony provided unusual operational detail about German efforts to stop Hall's networks and his reaction to learning her identity. Between August 1941 and November 1942, my office investigated 47 incidents we now know connect to Virginia Hall's operations. At the time, we analyzed them as separate activities by different cells. The tradecraft was too varied, the operational patterns too dispersed. Learning one person coordinated everything. It explained failures we couldn't understand. We arrested people connected to these operations. Under interrogation, they described their immediate contacts, but nothing suggesting central coordination. We now understand the network architecture was compartmentalized specifically to prevent interrogation from revealing the coordinator. After the war, reviewing her operational record, the 200 intelligence transmissions, the escape networks, the sabotage coordination, all while maintaining journalist cover, I concluded this represents perhaps the most successful Allied intelligence operation in occupied Europe. That it was accomplished by a woman with a prosthetic leg is notable, but ultimately beside the point. The effectiveness was absolute regardless of demographics. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. Virginia Hall wasn't an anomaly or propaganda. She was among the most effective intelligence operatives, deployed in occupied France. And her operational success, documented not just in Allied records, but in German testimonies acknowledging defeat, proved that the Gestapo's sophisticated counterintelligence systems could be systematically beaten by someone who understood their assumptions well enough to invalidate them. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Virginia Hall's final operational record stood as testament to what German counterintelligence had dismissed as impossible. Her documented intelligence activities in occupied France included over 200 verified transmissions to London, containing actionable military intelligence, coordination of escape networks that extracted 53 Allied personnel from capture or execution, establishment of resistance cells across 8 French cities that continued operating throughout the occupation, and direct coordination of sabotage operations that destroyed German materiel valued at over 50 million Reichsmarks. Her operational period from August 1941 through her forced withdrawal in November 1942 represented 15 months of sustained espionage that violated every statistical probability German counterintelligence had established. The average SOE agent lasted 42 days before arrest. Hall lasted 458 days and departed on her own terms, walking 50 miles over the Pyrenees mountains with a prosthetic leg rather than being captured. After returning to France in March 1944 under American OSS authority, she would continue operations through the liberation, coordinating resistance forces that killed an estimated 150 German soldiers and captured 500 others in the weeks surrounding D-Day. For this work, she received the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman so honored during World War II. The ceremony was private at her insistence. Publicity would compromise future operations, and Hall had no intention of retiring from intelligence work. To understand the magnitude of these achievements, comparison provides essential context. The most accomplished German counterintelligence officers in occupied France typically dismantled 3 to 5 Allied spy networks during their careers, with each network averaging 6 to 8 operatives before penetration and arrest. Klaus Barbie, considered among the most effective and brutal Gestapo commanders, successfully arrested and prosecuted dozens of resistance members and Allied agents during his tenure in Lyon. His success rate against traditional SOE networks approached 90%. Against Virginia Hall specifically, his success rate was 0. She operated within his jurisdiction for over a year. Her networks touched dozens of people he interrogated, and he never identified her until after her escape. The comparative failure was absolute. Allied intelligence officers conducting similar deep cover operations averaged 3 to 6 months before extraction or capture. Hall's 15-month initial deployment represented operational longevity unprecedented in occupied Europe. When she returned for her second deployment in 1944, she added another 14 months of field operations, bringing her total time behind enemy lines to 29 months across 2 deployments. This operational tempo sustained intelligence work in hostile territory where discovery meant torture and execution, required not just tradecraft skill, but extraordinary psychological resilience. The human cost of such extended operations was severe. Hall suffered chronic pain from her prosthetic leg throughout her service, particularly during the Pyrenees crossing, where the leather straps abraded her stump until it bled with every step. She endured constant stress of maintaining cover identity while coordinating operations where any mistake could expose entire networks to arrest and death. She witnessed comrades captured and executed, safe houses raided, and operations compromised, yet continued her mission without pause. The psychological toll of knowing that every transmission, every contact, every coordination decision carried life or death consequences for others is difficult to quantify but impossible to dismiss. Hall's individual record embodied the strategic impact of asymmetric intelligence operations. Allied intelligence services invested approximately $75,000 in Hall's 2 deployments when calculated across training, equipment, operational funding, and support infrastructure. The documented German response, 50 full-time counterintelligence personnel assigned to Lion operations, extensive informant networks, surveillance equipment, interrogation facilities, and investigation resources, represented an expenditure exceeding 8 million Reichsmarks, attempting to counter her operation specifically. The cost ratio of roughly 1:100 demonstrated perfect asymmetric efficiency. German forces spent 100 times more attempting to stop her than the Allies spent deploying her. Meanwhile, the intelligence she provided contributed to Allied bombing operations that destroyed German facilities worth tens of millions in replacement value. Her escape networks preserved trained Allied personnel, representing millions in training investment, and her resistance coordination degraded German operational capabilities throughout central France. By any economic calculation, Hull represented one of the highest return on investment assets in Allied intelligence operations. But Hull's impact extended beyond quantifiable statistics into strategic domains that numbers alone don't capture. The psychological effect on German counterintelligence after discovering they had been systematically defeated by a single woman with a prosthetic leg operating as a journalist degraded their confidence in detection systems and analytical methods. The propaganda value, though suppressed by German command, spread through frontline units as confirmation that Allied intelligence capabilities exceeded German assessments. The tactical disruption her networks inflicted forced German logistics to adopt longer, more vulnerable supply routes and divert personnel to security duties rather than combat operations. Most significantly, Hull's operational success validated the approach that would become doctrine for deep cover intelligence work. The best disguise isn't a disguise at all, but a legitimate identity executed so thoroughly that cover and reality become indistinguishable. She didn't pretend to be a journalist while being a spy. She was both simultaneously, with neither identity subordinate to the other. This operational philosophy would influence American intelligence methodology for decades. After the war ended, Virginia Hull faced challenges that combat hadn't prepared her for. She received her Distinguished Service Cross from OSS Director William Donovan in September 1945. In a private ceremony, she insisted remain classified to protect future operational capability. President Truman wanted to present the award publicly. Hull declined, stating that publicity would make her non-operational, and she intended to continue intelligence work. True to her word, she joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency in 1951, working initially on resistance support operations in Eastern Europe before transitioning to intelligence analysis. Her CIA career lasted until mandatory retirement in 1966 at age 60. Unlike many decorated war veterans, Hull never sought recognition or gave interviews about her wartime service. She spoke little about her experiences even to family members, maintaining operational security discipline decades after the classified material had been declassified. This reticence meant her story remained largely unknown outside intelligence circles for 30 years after the war ended. For decades, Hull's achievements remained obscure, known primarily through classified CIA files and scattered references in military histories focused on broader OSS operations. The Cold War context made American intelligence services reluctant to publicize specific operational details or individual agent stories. Hull herself discouraged attention, consistent with her lifelong commitment to intelligence work where anonymity was essential. Not until the 1980s, after Hull's death in 1982, did historians begin accessing declassified records that revealed the scope of her contributions. German archives opened after reunification provided corroborating evidence from the other side. Gestapo reports, counterintelligence assessments, and prisoner interrogation transcripts that confirmed Allied accounts weren't exaggerated. Klaus Barbie's trial in France in 1987 brought renewed attention to resistance operations in Lyon, with testimony referencing the limping lady who had eluded capture despite intensive pursuit. By the 1990s and 2000s, comprehensive biographies began documenting Hull's complete operational record, drawing on American, British, French, and German archival sources. Modern recognition accelerated in the 2010s as historians emphasized women's contributions to intelligence operations that official histories had minimized or ignored. In 2016, the CIA named a training facility the Virginia Hull Expeditionary Center. In 2019, she was inducted into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, and Time magazine created a retrospective cover honoring her as 1943 Woman of the Year. Yet even with increasing recognition, Hull's story remains less known than many male intelligence officers with far less impressive operational records, a disparity that reflects broader patterns in how military and intelligence history has been documented and celebrated. The story of Virginia Hall transcends its historical moment by illustrating principles of warfare and human capability that remain relevant. Her success demonstrated that asymmetric approaches can defeat superior resources when strategy exploits opponent assumptions rather than matching their strengths. The Germans possessed sophisticated counterintelligence infrastructure, extensive personnel, advanced interrogation methods, and comprehensive surveillance systems. Hall defeated this apparatus not by matching its sophistication, but by operating in ways their systems weren't designed to detect. She understood that German counterintelligence expected spies to behave like spies, covertly, suspiciously, using clandestine methods. By genuinely being a journalist while conducting espionage, she made herself invisible to detection systems optimized for finding hidden threats. This approach validates a core principle of asymmetric conflict. Your enemy's strength becomes irrelevant if you fight in dimensions where that strength doesn't apply. Hall also proved that underestimation based on prejudice creates exploitable vulnerabilities. German counterintelligence dismissed women as operationally incapable of serious espionage and assumed physical disability disqualified someone from field operations. These assumptions weren't random prejudices, but reflected broader Nazi ideology about gender roles and human capability. Those assumptions blinded German analysts to possibilities they should have considered. When evidence accumulated pointing toward Hall's involvement, German officers initially refused to believe it because the conclusion contradicted their ideological priors. Prejudice didn't just make them underestimate Hall. It made them incapable of accurately analyzing evidence, even when it directly contradicted their assumptions. Hall's operational record also illuminates what sustained courage requires. Flying combat missions or engaging in firefights demands courage measured in minutes or hours. Hall's intelligence work demanded courage sustained over months and years, where every day brought risk of torture and execution, where mistakes meant not just her death, but the deaths of everyone in her networks, where success brought no immediate recognition and failure would be catastrophic. This kind of courage, quiet, sustained, without witness or immediate reward, represents a different form of heroism than battlefield valor, but is no less significant. The determination required to continue intelligence operations month after month, knowing the statistics of agent survival, watching colleagues captured and killed, enduring physical pain from her prosthetic leg, yet never wavering in mission commitment, demonstrates psychological resilience as remarkable as any physical feat of endurance. Finally, her story validates that sometimes the most effective tool isn't the most sophisticated one, but the one calibrated correctly for the operational environment. The Gestapo's elaborate surveillance systems, advanced interrogation techniques, and comprehensive informant networks represented cutting-edge counterintelligence technology. But those sophisticated tools were optimized for the wrong threat model. Hall's approach, simple, direct, genuine, proved more effective than elaborate tradecraft specifically because it didn't look like tradecraft at all. In warfare, intelligence, and life, effectiveness matters more than sophistication, and correctly understanding the problem often matters more than having the most advanced solution. On November 9th, 1942, when Virginia Hall began her 50-mile escape over the Pyrenees Mountains, dragging her prosthetic leg through snow and ice while German search parties scoured Lyon for the spy who had eluded them for 15 months, she embodied a principle the Germans never understood, that determination, intelligence, and tactical innovation can defeat superior resources when those resources are deployed based on flawed assumptions. The Gestapo officers who dismissed the possibility that a woman with a prosthetic leg could be their most dangerous opponent calculated everything: surveillance coverage, interrogation effectiveness, statistical probabilities of agent survival, except the one variable that mattered most: that their own assumptions about who could be dangerous would blind them to the actual threat. Hall proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the most powerful one, or the most sophisticated one, but the one your enemy never sees coming because they've convinced themselves it couldn't exist. The Germans built an elaborate fortress to defend against threats that looked like threats. Hall walked through the front door, disguised as someone not worth watching, and by the time they realized their mistake, she was already climbing mountains they assumed were impassable. She survived not by matching their strength, but by understanding their blindness, and in wooden-legged determination that shouldn't have worked against an enemy that refused to take her seriously. The limping lady proved that the most dangerous spy is the one who operates in plain sight while you search for shadows.